Well, hello and welcome to this conversation with some stewardship practitioners and friends who are all affiliated with TENS, the Episcopal Network for Stewardship. I'm glad you're here. We're glad you're here. We're going to talk today about what is stewardship, a conversation. My name is Davey Gerhard, and I'm the Executive Director of TENS. I also serve as Canon for Stewardship at the Diocese of California, and I've been on my congregation's stewardship committee for like 3 decades. I love stewardship. It's what we do. And we want to unpack that a little for you today. For me, my first experience of giving in church came with the offertory, that moment of placing my gift in a plate that came down the aisle and then watching that be brought up front. And in my congregation, we sing the doxology as the gifts come forward and are placed on the altar. And so that whole movement of gifts coming from the congregation to arrive at the altar and then be gathered, blessed, broken, and shared, where then we also will go up to the altar to do the same thing with ourselves, is so much a part of how I came to know stewardship. Because what that says to me is that our gifts are shared with a world in need. And a world in need gets all that we are given, and we turn that into promise and gift and work. I love to see the impact of my giving and hear the stories of how the gifts that people share with their time, talent, and treasure come to bear in the communities that they're in their neighborhoods that their congregations serve. That would be my definition of what is stewardship. And my colleagues are going to have their definitions, and then we're going to talk about that together. So I'd like to introduce you to the president of the Board of TENS, my good friend, the Reverend Deborah Bennett.
Thank you, Davey. Hi, I am the Reverend Deborah Bennett, rector at Church of Our Savior in Akron, Ohio. And what is stewardship? I think one of the ways that I experience or define that word as being caretakers of each other and being that outward manifestation of God's promise to us to living a life abundant. And I think it is of the whole self, of our planet, of one another. And I think about these two women who cooked an amazing meal. I'm formerly of New York, so riding the subway. These two rode the subway from one borough into another borough with tons of food that they cooked. Went to a church on the Upper West Side of Manhattan and fed a community there. They shared the gift of their passion for cooking, but their passion for being in community and, that generosity and giving abundantly collectively to a community. And even when I think about it and I'm talking about it, it just brings this joy to my heart to be a part of the receiving end of that generosity, even though I wasn't there getting the food. But knowing their story and knowing these two people, it is that effect, that ripple effect, that transforming aspect of giving of oneself. And so I think stewardship goes beyond, it's what we do outside of the box. and it's not limited. It is actually so much broader, and it inherits that idea of abundance, of giving abundantly of ourselves, and the passion that is a part of that. So yeah, and like Davey, I love doing being engaged in mission and ministry in that way, keeping in mind of being caretakers one of another. So I'm going to introduce my colleague, the Very Reverend Mark Strobel.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm Mark Strobel. I'm the Dean of Gethsemane Cathedral in Fargo, North Dakota. My definition of stewardship was transformed at a TENS conference that I was at maybe a decade or so ago, a little bit more. My early approach in thinking about stewardship, even for a number of years in my ministry, was kind of grudging. And focused really on raising money for the congregation's budget. And in some ways, stewardship felt just like a church word to talk about hucksterism. How do we get people to open their wallets to help support the budget? That's never been very interesting to me. And at a TENS conference, I started hearing people talking in a way that I just heard Deborah talking about abundance and generosity and gratitude. And hearing that from people that I could really sense was true for them, that something about their encounter with God had made them generous, people who lived out of a sense of abundance and joy. I still have some concerns about language of stewardship, because sometimes when we use that language, we talk about it in ways that indicate we shouldn't do too much, that we should be quite cautious, that we should be guarded in our approach. And oftentimes that's when we're talking about stewardship of natural resources. That's one of the things that is behind us talking about stewardship. The truth of that is we want to be cautious, but not for a kind of internal, inward focused sense, but we want to be cautious or careful so that other people can, in the future, or people around us, share in the kind of abundance that we find in creation, the generosity that we've experienced in God's own giving toward us. And that in turn makes us not cautious for its own sake, but stewards who want to reach out to other people through our own generosity and gratitude and joy, so that they can also have a share in the good gifts of God. And that's all part of my kind of conversion experience. The closest an Anglican or Episcopalian will have to a conversion experience is what I've had through TENS, and how I think about stewardship now in the last years or so.
I love what I'm hearing here. And one concept, I mean, there are many that I want to tease out of this conversation, but the one you both just hit on, Deb and Mark, you were talking about caretaking and caution. Deb, you used the word caretaking. Mark, you used the word caution or cautious. I wonder, that's about love. That's about taking care of each other. And we often apply that to stewardship when we think about commodity, right? But not always when we think about the many varieties of gifts that we have. And I wonder what we have to say about that relationship between abundance and caretaking, how we find that relationship, and how we the other through line in both of your stories was about transformation, how gifts transform and transform us in the process. So I wonder what you might say to that relationship between generosity, abundance, and caretaking, or being cautious with our resources.
So I think that when we attend to creation, right? When we attend to the natural resources that have been a part of this planet, that when we are mindful of how we use them, how we use them impacts others, that caretaking becomes a piece of that, right? And so we, in a way, it is being generous when we begin to look outside of ourselves and attend to how the cultures and the peoples who live in particular areas are impacted by how the resources are being used or misused. And so I think when we attend to that, we are giving of ourselves in a different kind of a way, but it is being generous and hospitable in recognizing that when we are careful around our use of water or land or how we dispose of things, that is our stewardship in action, and our how we are manifesting being caretakers. And I think it comes from a place of generosity and hospitality, and that we're grateful, and it's also gratitude, right? We're grateful, and I think when one can look around and be grateful for the mountains or the water or the birds or the trees or the fact that one can does not have to worry about where the water is coming from, then we are more attentive on how we use those things. So I think it comes from a place of generosity and an abundant spirit.
Deborah, you said something that strikes me. The cathedral here has lots of green space, lots of green space. And for decades, that green space was just that. And caring for that land was just to keep the grass mowed, essentially. We've now devoted, so that, you know, that's a kind of stewardship of caring for the land for its own sake. But what we've done in the past years is converted 60,000 square feet of that green space into garden space for the community, for families in need, for volunteers who work the gardens. Now that land has become a source of generosity. It's still stewardship in the sense of caring for the land, but it's not for its own sake. It's so that the land can be enjoyed, and the fruit of the land can be enjoyed by all kinds of people. And I wonder if there's maybe not a way to think about individual stewardship with that as a kind of guiding picture, that sometimes in our personal lives we think about stewardship as caring for ourselves or our finances for their own sake, as opposed to thinking about how our lives might be used to give someone a greater share in what we've experienced.
You know, I love that idea that we who are touched by the Holy Spirit, who are who are given these great gifts, then have the ability to transform them from what the Creator gave us into yet more of what creation needs. And so we amplify the gifts that we've been given with the blessing of the Spirit that's been poured onto us by the covenant that we enter as baptized Christians, by the community, by the walk of love that we do with each other, that these opportunities take mowed grass and turn it into food producing garden. Same land, growing things on it, but now it's transformed into other purpose. That's what our gifts do, whether they are our time or our talent or our treasure. When they pass through us and out of us, and they enter the world in a different way, in a changed way, that God, the agent of all change, works through us to then serve our communities, to serve our neighbors, to give them what they need.
Well, and not only food producing, but community building.
Community.
I mean, so each week during growing and harvest season, here we have 85 or more people who are engaged in working the land, not just the people who are going to eat the produce, but are working the land. And that's a remarkable thing. So there's great community that grows through a kind of generous spirit as well, that takes us out of ourselves and joins us to the people around us. But I don't think if you ask somebody what stewardship meant, I don't think they would say any of what we've just described. You know what I mean? This is a part of the conversion experience that we're all engaged in. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I think that we will use the words time, talent, treasure, gift, but it's so much more than that. And that transforming agent that happens and the community building that happens that gives rise to even more, right? It is joyful, it's impactful, it becomes something different, the bread becomes something different, the wine becomes something different. And when we are engaged in these type of relational events, something else comes out of it that continues to give, right? It is, it's that gift that keeps on giving.
It's true.
And in a very impactful and substantive way, and not for self. And I think that's a big piece, that we are blessed individually, but God's beloved community is blessed on a much larger scale because it continues to give. And it continues to feed that joyful spirit. There is that phrase, God loves a joyful giver. But the reality is, I think we lose ourselves when we are engaged with doing for others, giving for others, building up our siblings along the way. And, it's just, yeah.
Yeah.
Indescribable sometimes.
Indescribable. Well, and that's what a transformative journey is. It's often hard to take what the journey that we've been on and tell other people about it. But that's the way of love. That's how we, and that one of the gifts of stewardship, I think, is that we're able to, as you say, get outside ourselves, and move into the realm where it's, I always think of God's math, where 2 plus 2 does not equal 4. It can equal any number higher than 4, 104, right? Because once you add God into the equation, it just multiplies,
Yeah.
because it's in touch with so much more of that active spirit. I love, and I think that's why telling the stories of how our gifts are received, how the impact of our giving is felt in our communities, is so important to us when our congregations talk about raising money or recruiting volunteers or starting up new ministries. That feedback loop of coming back and telling the stories, sharing what was learned, sharing how life changed in that community because of this ministry or this idea or these gifts that were shared. It's so important to tell those stories back into the community. I think in church, we're often the worst at sharing the good news, even though that's what we're told to do over and over again. We've got great news to share, and we should feed that back into our gratitude cycle, uh, so that we can remember that the gifts that we've shared have changed lives.
Yeah.
They've had real impact.
Well, and I think there's another side to that storytelling equation too, that at least I find is true for myself. That if I'm generous with my money, I discover a transformation in an awareness of how much I think I need to live on. Or I discover that maybe I don't need a new car or a new suit because somebody else is sharing in my money. I think for parish clergy, this is probably true with time, where we become very cautious about our time and our calendars, and are aware that we don't want to do too much. But there are times when uh, we are extended outward and discover we're just fine. And we can be generous with our time in ways we maybe didn't anticipate, and that transforms us. So the giver is transformed in a way too. This is also true with talents, but I think along the way the giver is changed uh, through giving away treasure, through giving away time, through offering up talent. And that's another story that needs to be told too, in a kind of personal testimony way, not just for people who've been impacted by giving, but how people who are generous have discovered their lives have changed because they don't need as much to live on as they thought they might.
That's an important and hard to understand lesson because it makes no sense, right? It's countercultural to give away what you've worked so hard to earn, or what you have, the time that you have, that is so valuable, and you think about spending it with your family or dedicating it to the things that you love, and then that calendar request comes and you're like, no, can I do it? But when we share, when we realize that we share, and by giving away we actually become freer, we learn that beautiful countercultural lesson that Jesus also taught us when he went around turning the world upside down and healing on the Sabbath and giving things away that shouldn't be given away. And when expensive ointment is wasted on him, he says, not a waste at all. Give it away when you can. These ideas that uh, it's not ours anyway, so holding on to it makes no sense. And look at what happens when we free ourselves up for that. I had a conversation with one of our deacons in the diocese many years ago, and he said he and his husband had decided to begin tithing. People volunteer this information to me all the time. I'm like, great. But tell me more about that. Wow, I can't imagine. And at the time, I could not imagine what giving away 10% of my income. And like any good Episcopalian, I was like, is that before tax or after tax? What did you do there? But, you know, beyond all that silliness, I couldn't imagine giving away that much money. He said, we're fine. There's always enough. People get fed, rent gets paid, clothes are on our body. We have a life that we love, and we can still give. We can still give. We find more ways to give. And once we get on that journey, and it is a journey, right? We don't all start off there because we have to learn about it. It is countercultural to give away what we have. But I think that's the whole point of Jesus, right?
Well,
Be
not least
countercultural.
him saying, if you want to save your life, you'll lose it.
Yeah.
I mean, all of the examples that you just gave are sort of spinning out that core truth that a life of generosity is where you find life. Well, that nobody in the culture believes that, but we do. And we can tell stories about how that's true, not least the deacon who can tell a story about how tithing still uncovered enough in his life, or he discovered that there was still enough in his life.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it is still the loaves and fishes. There's enough. There's enough for us, and there's enough for our neighbors. And that call to live counterculturally, right? Not to live that abundant life, not defined by how society defines it, but how Christ modeled that for us. And and what our covenant tells us what that looks like. And that abundant life, and living that abundant life, we always know that we have enough to share. There's always a loaves and fishes moment. And yeah, there's always enough. He said, if you have two cloaks, you can only wear one at a time, give away the other one, you still have a cloak, right? There's always enough. And what that looks like, what that abundance looks like, will be different for everyone. And it may not have a price tag on it. So that it's different for everybody. And the moment of sharing is different for everybody as well. But when we do that, it gets incarnated, right? And then enables another to live that abundant life that God promised.
And that's what it's about, isn't it? Enabling others to live that abundant life.
Yeah.
We preach it, we teach it, we share. Do we have any last thoughts, friends?
So what is stewardship?
What is stewardship? Tell us, Deb.
I think it is a way that we live our lives walking in love, telling our stories with generosity and abundance, with gratitude and passion, and with gift. And using that gift in relationship with God, collectively building up community, and in doing that, transforming our lives, ourselves, and the world in which we live.
Well, it's big work.
Putting our lives to God's use is just the way you started it, Davey, about the offertory. I mean, just having our lives offered and dedicated and put to the use of God is, I think, at the heart of stewardship. For me, post-conversion experience.
Post-conversion.
Post-stewardship conversion experience, yeah.
It was always there, Mark. It was always there. Well, one of the things that I love about TENS, the Episcopal Network for Stewardship, is that we engage in conversation and dialogue and teaching about these concepts all the time. Conversations like the one you've just witnessed are all through our website and through our webinars and through our conversations. So check us out at tens.org. Get familiar with our resource library. Come and follow our webinars and use the resources. They're there for you. And we hope that you have an abundant, generous life in which you can see the transformation and feel the impact of your giving in a world in need. I thank my colleagues and friends for joining me in this conversation. And I thank all of you for all that you do for the church and the world. And I wish you all good gifts. Thank you, friends.